All right, I'll do my best. So, this event being on the heels of our Water Sustainability Summit, I think most of you attended that, or if you haven't, certainly online to get an update of the progress and the projects that United has put forth as far as water sustainability for now and the future. But today, I want to take an opportunity to highlight a very big problem we have here in Ventura County, a problem that has been ongoing and affects every resident, every farmer, and every business owner here in Ventura County, both directly or indirectly. And that problem stems from the National Marine Fisheries Service and their presence in Piru Creek. And what we've finally been able to do is compiled enough evidence and hopefully, if I do it right, you'll agree with me that there's overwhelming evidence to demonstrate likely one of the most egregious, malfeasant regulatory acts of all time. And to get into that, we're going to talk about where this phantom fish came from. And so what's important, go back a little bit, and I know this seems kind of obvious, but I think it's important to really understand that these definitions mean something. Marine, National Marine Fisheries Service, of or to relating to the sea, managing the mammals species in the sea. So taking a look at what developed the National Marine Fisheries Service, what enacted them, what was an act of Congress? And it was through the Magnuson-Stevenson Act. And what that act does is it outlines and charters the responsibilities and the jurisdiction of the National Marine Fisheries Service. And when you read that act, it doesn't talk about anything inland. It talks about marine life. It talks about vessel control. It talks about commercial fishing, international and foreign fishing criteria. It talks about fishing management plans in U.S. federal waters. U.S. federal waters, not on land, not in creeks, not in freshwater streams, in U.S. federal waters. Why is that important? Well, here in California, federal waters is defined 3 nautical miles from the shoreline. So not at the shoreline, 3 nautical miles off the shoreline. Everything else is considered state control, not the National Marine Fisheries Service control. We say, well, Mauricio, the argument would be, well, if there's an endangered species and it's anadromous, has to go from the sea to freshwater inland, well, National Marine Fisheries has to manage that species, doesn't it? No, it does not. That's the job of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And it's very distinctive, very specific, because in their laws, agreements, and treaties, they're the handoff. They're the interjurisdictional agency that is supposed to then take those responsibilities and manage them inland, in the creeks, in the streams, not the National Marine Fisheries Service. That's U.S. Fish and Wildlife's job. So why is National Marine Fisheries Service even involved? Well, there was another act, the Interjurisdictional Fisheries Act and Anadromous Fish Conservation Act, that gave NMFS some authority to provide input. When you go through that act, it gives the responsibility of the National Marine Fisheries Service to help provide funding, to help provide input, not to regulate and not to enforce. In those acts, very specifically, NMFS is viewed as a stakeholder. And they encourage, through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services, that reach out to these types of agencies when you're performing any type of analysis or application. Again, U.S. Fish and Wildlife inland is responsible for biological assessments as well as biological opinions, not the National Marine Fisheries Service. So as we go along, why this is really important, because their influence is well documented throughout the Western United States. So to help, really substantiate this evidence and really talk about where did this whole steelhead conversation start from to begin with here in Ventura County, and again, specifically in Piru Creek in United Water Conservation's service area. Well, back in the late 1800s, there was the planting of steelhead for sport. These came from Northern California hatcheries, not from the wild, not native, not the natural fish migration passage, but Northern California fish hatcheries. Why I stress Northern is because, as many of you know, for over a decade, the issue's been over Southern California steelhead, which, if you recall, was made up through a distinct population segment process that the National Marine Fisheries Service initiated. So there we are, late 1800s, bringing in train cars, planting steelhead and rainbow trout throughout Ventura County and also in Piru Creek. So we want to take a little journey, and if bear with me, this is a timeline because I think it's important to understand, again, how these discussions, how these regulatory circumstances evolve over steelhead. Well, we have an era here, and this is the watershed of several years where there was a major attempt to plant steelhead in the region. And you could see all the way through 1938 that there was a lot of planting, a lot going on in this particular area, but nothing could stick. Nothing could stick. Again, trying to plant for sport, trying to draw people in Ventura County. And despite the efforts, there was still no steelhead. There were still, no migration pattern. And we're going to start going into some of the reasons why. So here are some stream surveys. And we're going to go through over a number of years of these stream surveys that were conducted by professionals from the California Fish and Game, now known California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Back then it was California Department of Fish and Game. Now these experts, they combed the streams, they combed the creeks. They were very present and they collected a lot of data. And what you'll see here is in 1935, in the Agua Blanca stream, just its tributary, first tributary going into Piru Creek, the stream is not much value because there's low water in the summer. It's hot, it's dry, it's sandy, hardly the right habitat for steelhead migration. So we move on to the 1940s. Here's another stream survey by experts from the state agency. And you can see here, this is, the tributary that we just talked about. If present dry cycle continues, this stream should be listed as of no value and planting stopped. Not migration stopped, planting stopped. The planting of northern hatchery fish. And so you say, well, why? Well, here's what they were observing. I mean, it seems pretty clear. Here's that tributary. There is no coverage. It's loose sand moving, and it's hot, and it's dry. I don't know if that looks like a migratory corridor or migratory range to you, but nothing's surviving out there. And again, these are surveys done by professionals back at that time. So moving on the timeline, here we go again, 1945, another survey, point out very clearly, here's what they're observing. These are these so-called migration corridors that the National Marine Fisheries Service continues to provide the narrative that tens of thousands of fish were going up and down these tributaries. And that's why we need to preserve this habitat. That's why we need to have these restrictions, these regulations to create fish passage, when all along, this is what they were observing. And as you can see here, when there's a question of how many fish present, none. The success of species present, poor habitat. Does poor habitat mean critical habitat? Spawning areas, poor. Again, this isn't United survey. These are the professionals that were assigned through the state of California. 1948, another survey in these tributaries right above what is now Pyramid Lake. No sign of fish life present. None. 49. These were, a few of these segments here where they surveyed, and they readily agreed that such water temperatures existing now, there is no hope for stocking this year. Again, no observation of fish migrating back and forth. Planting and stocking was what they were trying to accomplish, and they couldn't because it's dry, there's no cover, and it's hot. This is right above Pyramid, and it's poor because I'm focusing on this area because, although fish were planted throughout the county, I wanted to focus on Piru Creek because, as you'll see later in the presentation, there's a significant problem that's going on with one of our public safety projects. And so with the mounting evidence, it's making harder and harder to get through the permit and regulatory process. And you can see here right above Pyramid Lake, and I'm sure all this information would be really helpful for Department of Water Resources who are going through a similar situation with the National Marine Fisheries Services as we are. But this creek is unsuitable for fish. Unsuitable for fish, yet at Santa Felicia Dam, and we'll get into a little bit, it's unbelievable the amount of requirements they're trying to place on us and a very expensive fish ladder for the phantom fish. 49. I mean, we can go on and on. Natural propagation of trout is poor. There's no breeding grounds. There's no breeding grounds. Even if magically they got to that location, there's no breeding grounds. And here, no trout were seen. And you could see, look, this is dry mountainous area, loose sand, no trees, no shrubs. I think it's becoming very clear why, to this day, no one has ever seen a steelhead, photographed a steelhead, or caught one. Certainly not the Southern California steelhead. So now we're getting into really some important documents because, as you know, the Santa Felicia Dam was constructed in 1955. So a lot of analysis, monitoring, design had to go into prior to the construction of such a dam. You don't want to put up any kind of infrastructure that would affect species or affect habitat. So we have a number of documents here, and this is one of them in 1951, where got to read this because it's just, again, I talk about these egregious acts that are occurring now because all of this information, the regulatory agency has, and they continue to just simply ignore and impose their will on agencies like ours, on other cities, on counties, and certain other mutuals. But here you have, the fisheries value of these drainage lies primarily rainbow trout in headwaters areas. The range turnout, most of the subject drainage is curtailed by the lack of sustained year-long stream flows. Now, to migrate, you're going to need those year-long stream flows because fish need to rest, they need to spawn, and then they want to continue up, but not in this area because high summer water temperatures above the tolerance of trout also prevent trout development in what otherwise be suitable stream in Piru Creek. Again, this one specifically to Piru Creek. So, and here's one for you. So again, all of this evidence, all of these surveys, streams held by professionals that are, again, combing the area. Again, in order for us to properly design the Santa Felicia Dam, we need some concurrence, we need some approval levels. And here is a letter from Fisheries to the United Water Conservation District that says, "I'd be glad, however, to state our general views regarding the dam's proposed organization on Piru Creek, that these streams of importance are not of importance to migratory fishes, and therefore no structures such as a fish ladder, would be required for these dams," that being the Santa Felicia Dam. Why? Because there was no sign of any steelhead, no observation, no habitat conducive to pass them in the first place. So me just give you a little bit of further evidence, because we've had the surveys by the state agencies. Here is some historical information. You could go to their the Tataviam Band of Missions Historical Museum. That's where you'll find all this information. It's well documented that this is the Tataviam Band of Mission Indians. They were the ones that were living and cultivating in that particular watershed around Piru Creek. And as you could see, what's documented as their food source, not one mention of fish, let alone steelhead, in their diet, because they weren't there. They had to live off dry conditions, and what you see as food sources are present in dry conditions. As a matter of fact, the San Ynez Band of Chumash Indians, I believe this was about the 1970s, when they uncovered these Minden piles, they identified 170,000 fish bones, about 200 species. No steelhead found in Ventura County. No steelhead bones found in Ventura County. So we have all of the evidence of surveys. We have the historical evidence of tribes that were here, long before us. Yet, despite all of this evidence, you've heard me say it before, because the agencies have this information, and you could see their surveys, their migration hydrology. There's analysis and data from some of the most renowned scientists at the time. All this information, yet the National Marine Fisheries Service, when you present this, continues to say, well, United, the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. They still want to impose their will, because, folks, it's not about successful fish passage, not about successful habitat for this agency. That's a completely different agenda. We know they want this dam torn down. They want this area to lose one of their most vital assets for water storage, water conveyance, and water recharge, because of a phantom fish. And they're trying to use arbitrary and capricious interpretations of their own law and policies to do so. The evidence is overwhelming. And again, they have this. So most of you might know one of the problems we have at the Santa Felicia Dam is because the National Marine Fisheries Service issued us a jeopardy biological opinion, about the worst sentence you could get, for species. Now, you saw all the evidence, which they had. They didn't go out. They didn't perform any monitoring themselves. They performed no analysis themselves. What they did is they created this, what's called the Steelhead Recovery Plan. And they literally took a pen and formed a critical habitat area around our watershed and said, jeopardy biological opinion, because that dam is impeding fish passage. And you could see the standards here for jeopardy. I mean, the species has to exist first. They have to make a determination and a finding that the species periled, or that somehow our facility or operation is impeding on the migration and passage for fish. What we have today is zero evidence of any migratory range for steelhead trout, let alone this made-up name of Southern California steelhead trout. Now, the jeopardy biological opinion has consequences, major consequences. So what's been imposed at the Santa Felicia Dam is 24/7, 365, we have to release stored water out of Lake Piru to bolster what they're calling critical habitat for the phantom steelhead that may show up someday. Now, we have over a century of evidence and information that demonstrates otherwise, but not only are we releasing water, they want a new fish passage structure up, around, through the dam, and Right now, we have a public safety project. As you know, we're working with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to improve our spillway, to improve our outlet works, again, because of safety downstream. We have to do these projects, and they're impeding the process because of these circumstances. So, and they want another bite at the apple. They want another bite at the apple. So major restrictions here, releasing water, having to perform mitigation measures. Again, you got to ask why, for what, where is their jurisdiction? If the Magnuson-Stevenson Act only gave them jurisdiction in federal waters, and there is no act, no documentation that provides them jurisdiction otherwise, yet we continue to allow them to impose their will and create havoc, cost us a lot of money that again rests on the shoulders of the ratepayers. So what does that look like right now? Well, since that Jeopardy biological opinion was issued, again, and to date, not just from those past surveys, to date, all the surveys, all the snorkeling efforts we do, no steelhead are found. Not one, not even one. $10 million to date. Again, not United 10 millions, but unfortunately, the ratepayers, the constituents, the stakeholders, just in scientific studies, legal fees, because they keep moving the goalpost. See, success is not part of their plan. Success is not good for business for the National Marine Fisheries Service. So they have to keep coming up with other requests and requirements that we've got to go out and perform. And what the grand prize is after all of this is we are looking and facing a potential $100 million fish passage structure for Southern California steelhead. That's never existed in this creek. So even if they made it to the confluence of the Santa Clara River and Piru Creek, there are several significant barriers between that confluence and our dam that they couldn't make it up anyway. I mean, there are already barriers in the creek. So even if we agreed to build $100 million fish passage structure for the phantom fish, they couldn't even get there, even if they wanted to. So bottom line, one of the major issues, and we need every single one of your help. We're struggling because, as you know, we keep providing empirical data and evidence, but they keep, again, imposing these arbitrary and capricious narratives that are forcing us to do something. And one of them is obstructing, delaying the public safety project at the Santa Felicia Dam. As you recall, we're required, because of the new probable maximum flood calculations, to increase the capacity of our spillway. Seismically, standards have changed that we have to improve our outlet works. This is all so that in major flooding events, the water doesn't topple over the crest of the dam, because that means dam failure. That means Piru, Fillmore, they're under 20 feet of water. Billions of dollars and potential lives would be perished if something like this happens. So we're ready, we're in design mode, but now the National Marine Fisheries Service continues to obstruct and delay, so it costs you more money. They get more, opportunities to create a new biological opinion, and that's their goal. They've now put it in writing that they want to conduct a new biological opinion with greater restrictions, greater water releases, so on and so forth. So fortunately, the courts have weighed in on this, okay? And what the court said is that the National Marine Fisheries Service aren't allowed to presume anymore. They don't get that deference anymore. They certainly don't get to presume that distorts the analysis of effects and creates false positives. Anything that you've seen today, is there any evidence where the National Marine Fisheries Service has any jurisdiction, has any charter to conduct a biological opinion? The biological opinion needs to be revoked. As you can see there, because there is no migratory range for steelhead, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife don't need to be present. No federal regulatory agency other than FERC needs to be present. And I think U.S. Fish and Wildlife know that. That's why they're not weighing in. California Department of Fish and Wildlife know that. But yet the National Marine Fisheries Service continues to intimidate, impose their will, and threaten us for what? Tearing down the dam, dewatering Lake Piru, unless we comply. So, folks, I mentioned we need your help because we've tried many things, but we can't get a meeting with these folks. The National Marine Fisheries Service would love nothing more for us to just, then sue, because they just get to hand it over to the Department of Justice. And now we have to deal with the Department of Justice, years, potential decades of lawsuits, and more money wasted on a lawsuit than putting back into water sustainability. We can't get a meeting with these folks because it doesn't have to go to a court. This is an administrative decision that can be made because there's no standard that's applicable for a jeopardy biological opinion. There's no standard or jurisdiction for the National Marine Fisheries Service to even be there in the first place. They have this information. The local office has the information, but they refuse to acknowledge it because, again, their agenda isn't success for the species or habitat. It's something else. So if anybody has any connection to these folks, anything you could help us out, maybe not just them, but anybody within NOAA or the Department of Commerce, we would really appreciate if you could try to get us a meeting, because I think the evidence certainly is overwhelming. And if these folks saw it, I think they could make a decision on this, but we can't get to them. So, with that, I know we'll open up any questions, but again, appreciate your time. And again, this is happening all over the Western United States. This is the most egregious malfeasant act of a fishery regulatory agency, I think, in history. And it's time it's got to end, again, for the community and for everybody else and for our sustainability, because if they can continue to get away with this, it's going to be everything else. And leave it with this. I know a lot of my colleagues say, well, Mauricio, I don't have steelhead in my service area. Why do I care? We saw what happened to bees. And if they could create a distinct population segment for trout, they can create a distinct population segment for anything, butterfly, lizard, you name it. So you should care. And I think it's time we get this to stop. So thank you. And please, we need your help. Thank you.
Yes, question from Mauricio. There's a push to have the Department of Fish and Wildlife list southern steelhead as endangered species on top of the federal listing. Is that indicative to you that maybe the feds realize they don't have a sustainable interest in southern steelhead because of the jurisdiction issue?
Yes, thank you. And yes, that is something that cow trout actually filed with the California Department of Fish and Game Commission to do just that, to list not just the Southern California steelhead as candidacy for the California ESA, but also rainbow trout. And this occurred after their attempt. Some of you may remember, because some of you were involved in helping kill this bill. Back in 2021, there was what was called the Blue Carbon Bill of 2021. And the Blue Carbon Bill, when you read that, and that was a bill that I was asked to testify in front of Congress in opposition of. When you read that bill, it attempted to provide the National Marine Fisheries Service jurisdiction inland. So if they already had jurisdiction, why would they need to go the extent to codify it through Congress? And so, yes, now there's an attempt by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, Cal Trout, Wish-Toyo, Center of Biological Diversity to create the candidacy for not only steelhead, but rainbow trout, which if you've seen any one of Murray McEachron's presentations, there's an abundance of.
Thank you.
Any other questions for any of the GMs?
Managers, we appreciate our 2.5 managers, I guess. However, no, you did a fabulous job. Absolutely, Kelly. Thank you so much. Our 3 managers who came out today and gave us our yearly presentation. So thank you all very much. Also want to thank the people, I neglected to say this, for the bus tour that we just had. It turned out to be a fabulous tour of the facilities throughout Ventura County and all the sponsors and people that participated in that. Thank you all very much for that as well. So our next event again is the end of the year corporate night, and we look forward to seeing all of you there. In January, we're told that we do have a replacement for Eric Bolt to get a projection for the year coming up, even though we just heard Eric. We do have one coming up and get to meet our new representative for that. For those of you that are earning credits, you want to type in the word done, D-O-N-E, and that way, or when you leave here, make sure you sign off on that as well. Any announcements from anybody out here that we need to hear from about anything whatsoever? No. Okay, very good. Thank you. Done. I did say done. Yeah. Okay. So very good. So thank you all. And if there are any other questions, maybe the 3 managers can hang in there for a few minutes and take some additional questions. So thank you all. Have a good day, and we'll see you then.